All right, welcome to our webinar. My name is Sharon Burton. I'm hosting today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Couple of pieces of business before we get started. We are in fact recording this webinar. The link should be made available to you sometime tomorrow. You will get that in an email automatically. Feel free to share that link. The recording will be hosted on YouTube, just so that you know up front, in case your organization blocks YouTube, you'll know that you need to find another machine to view it on. But it will be on YouTube. Bonnie, our presenter today, will also be putting her slides up on SlideShare. So if you don't want the recording, but you do want the slides, those will be available on SlideShare. She also has some auxiliary files to help you. So if at the end of the webinar you go, okay, that's great, but I'm a little bit confused about where to start, she's got some ancillary files. Those will be on my website. You'll get a link to those files as well in the email tomorrow, so keep an eye out for an email from me that's got the link to the webinar recording and the link to the auxiliary files, ancillary files to support you. Please don't panic if you don't get it until over the weekend. A little jammed up right now, but you should get this automatically tomorrow. If you will look at your GoToWebinar panel, you'll notice that there is an area where you can post questions. Please feel free to post questions. Bonnie is not going to address them during the presentation, but we have set aside at least 20 minutes to deal specifically with your questions. So if at the end of the webinar you go, okay, well, that's fine, but I don't exactly understand how to frame my problem as a business case or how to get started with my problem, she has generously offered to help solve your problem, and we put aside at least 20 minutes to do that. So this is a great opportunity to get a little brainstorming around your problem, figure out where to start, peeling at the edges to figure it all out for you specifically. And there we go. So I'm going to be quiet now after I introduce Ms. Graham and kind of manage things in the background. So thank you for coming. This is the Getting What You Want, Building a Successful Business Case webinar. Bonnie, feel free to take it over.
All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time on this this lovely Thursday morning or Friday morning for those of you who are across the date line, Friday evening. But time zone math is not my friend. Actually, math is not my friend. We can just stop that one right there. And yet, despite math not being my friend, I've got a pretty good idea of how to put numbers together in such a way that finance actually pays attention to them, which is the core of what we're going to be talking about, and it's the core of how to frame a business case, because a business case is essentially it's a persuasive essay with some nice numbers behind it backing up and making a case that your proposal is not only necessary but inevitable and, in fact, financially a better choice than what was being done before. So let's go ahead and dive into our slides and start talking that through. So who am I, and why do I get to talk to you about this stuff? My name is Bonnie Graham Gonzalez. I'm the Senior Manager for Marketing Communications at Scantron Corporation. Before that, I was the Senior Manager for User Experience and Documentation at Scantron Corporation, so I've gone over to the marketing group. I'm the former owner and CEO of a documentation services company called Manual Labor. We successfully sold services to the software and consumer electronics industries for close to 20 years. I'm an associate fellow for the Society for Technical Communication, and I'm an instructor at the University of California, San Diego Extension, and at the main campus for University of California, Riverside. And I talk about these same concepts in both of in various classes at both of those organizations. So those are kind of my credentials and how I get to speak to you folks today. Well, plus I know Sharon, which, helps. So let's just dive right into it. Sharon, can you do me a favor and put up, before we go to the next slide, sorry about that little dizzy moment there, can we go ahead and put up the first poll, please? And what I'm asking here is how many of you have struggled with getting your proposals accepted. And Sharon, I'm just seeing my slides right now, so when we get poll results, can you let me know what they are?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. We'll leave that open for a minute or two until everybody's had a chance to respond. It's just a basic yes, no. I'll let that go. One of the reasons I ask that while you're thinking about and answering that is because I've discovered, certainly in the TechCom field and frustratingly a little bit in the Marcom field as well, we sometimes have a hard time, despite the fact that we put words together for a living, and many of those words are persuasive words. We sometimes have a hard time getting our initiatives approved all the way up the food chain. And some of that's due to budget issues entirely beyond our control, but some of it is due to the way we present the information and how easy it is to forget that all of this is a business, and so what we're asking for needs to make business sense in addition to making sense for us and our group. So Sharon, do we feel like we've got a quorum on that poll yet?
Sorry, I had the mute button on. Yes, I watched the numbers and we're good, and it looks like pretty much everybody who wanted to vote has voted. And can you see the quick poll results?
No, I can't. Not without leaving my screen and losing my place in the presentation.
Then let me share them with you. 51% of the people attending said, or responding actually, said yes, they have had a project or a proposal turned down and don't know why.
Okay.
40% said no, that hasn't happened, and 9% said, I have no idea.
Okay. Well, that's fair, because sometimes you throw these requests and proposals out and you never know, right? They just go out into the ether, and we hope someone somewhere is listening. And sometimes they are, and frankly, sometimes they aren't. But that's a different story for another webinar. Okay, so one of the reasons I've discovered, I did some digging around years ago, and discovered that the people who approve these proposals frequently don't understand them. And in most businesses, there's a knee-jerk reaction, unless it's something absolutely critical to the business that they know is critical to the business. In other words, they understand the pain that's occurring there. They will reject the proposal because why are you spending money on something you don't understand? That's a valid viewpoint. That's, in fact, something I want the people who are responsible for the money parts of any company that I'm in to be paying attention to. I'm very pro them being careful with the company money. Having worked for companies that were not so careful with that, and that did not turn out how we all wanted it to. That was one of those it will only end in tears kind of things. So I'm very bullish on them being careful with what gets spent and how it gets spent. But it's a little frustrating because, I communicate for a living, so what do you mean you didn't understand that? But, of course, also as people who communicate for a living, we know the burden of communication, at least initially, is on us. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean by a business case, and then we'll dive into some of the whys and wherefores of that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you still have your Who Am I slide up?
Yes, and I intend to have my Who Am I slide up.
Then I will shut up.
Nope, that's perfectly fair and valid. Thank you for reminding me, but there's a reason I'm not moving on yet. So, because this is part of the Who Am I story, this is how I discovered the power and importance of business cases. At my very first job, and I'm so dating myself here, at my very first job, I was working as an intern technical communicator, and they stuck me in a storage room, really, and put me on an 8086 computer, the green CRTs, microscopic hard drive, all of that. Those of you who are old enough to remember those, are looking back in kind of negative nostalgia right now at that. And the thing was just a dog, and I was working in WordPerfect for DOS. And those of you who were around at that time are going, oh, God, I remember those days. And my day basically went, I'd come in, I'd boot my computer, which, beautifully happened instantly because there was nothing to boot up. I'd start up my word processor. Wait. I'd load my file. Wait. I'd locate where I had left off in my file. Wait. I'd review what I'd been working on, make any changes I wanted to make, save my file. Wait. exit my word processor, open the application I was documenting, play with it until my brain was full, close that product, open my word processor, wait, open my file, wait, find where I was, wait, write until my brain wasn't full anymore, save, wait, and then it was lather, rinse, repeat. And so that was very frustrating to me. Plus, all the developers had brand new, shiny 286s. Ooh, those things went fast, and they were new, and they were shiny, and I wanted one. So I went to, this was a very small company, and I went to the controller, and I said, Bob, his name actually was Bob, I want a new computer. And he said, why? And I said, well, because mine's slow and poopy, and the developers all have shiny new 286s, and I want a shiny new 286. And he goes, I don't care. I don't see a business case for it. And I went, oh. And I walked out of the office, and on the way back to my office, I thought, well, I wasn't raised by one of the first woman managers at General Dynamics for nothing. You want a business case, buddy, you're going to get a business case. So I went back to my desk, and I took out my stopwatch, and I timed how long the wait was going on every day. And I timed that for 2 weeks. And I discovered that I was spending, on average, 3.5 hours of an 8-hour day doing nothing but watching my hard drive light blink. And this is leaving aside any time I had to print anything. We'll leave that aside for the moment. So I took that time, and I took what I was being paid, and I took a prorated amount for my office, because I knew how much we were paying per square foot, and I took a prorated amount of all of the other overhead associated, all of the load, as it were, associated with them having me there. And I multiplied the number of hours I spent doing nothing but waiting by that total number in dollars, went back to Bob, dropped it on his desk with my backup information, and I said, we can have, if you get me a new computer, and I wrote up the implications of that. You know, releases were going with documentation that was going out late, or releases were delayed because documentation wasn't ready yet, etc. And I dropped it on Bob's desk, and I said, if you get me a new computer on Monday, it will have paid for itself and recouped productivity by the following Monday. Monday, I had a new computer. So, wow, that business case worked. So that was the first hit that addicted me to business cases. To this day, I will admit, I wake up occasionally in the morning going, thank God it never occurred to them to simply give me a second 8086, which would have solved the problem pretty much the same way, because we had those lying around in the storeroom. And I carefully didn't mention that, because there are times you carefully don't mention things in a business case. So let's take a look at the next slide and talk about why that worked. Well, part of why that worked is because the goal of the company is to make a profit. If the company doesn't make a profit, you don't get paid. It's that simple. Eventually, you don't get paid. It's not like, tomorrow you don't get paid, but eventually you don't get paid. Buy low, sell high isn't just a stock tip. It's the way you want to run a business. You want to buy your supplies, your people, your whatever, for as low as you can, while you're selling your products for as high as you can, so that you can have that profit. A well-run company then takes that profit and comes up with next year's new best thing and shares some of it out to its shareholders. We'll leave aside what poorly run companies do with that money. That's a different story for another webinar. But it's important when you're putting a business case together to be thinking about how money flows through a company. So briefly, if we look at the flow chart, money comes in as revenue. And you guys are getting a very short version of this because, A, this is a 1-hour webinar, and B, I'm presuming many of you are in business, have been in business. None of this should be a surprise or new information to you. I just want to go over it because it's the framework for everything else we're going to talk about. So money comes in as revenue, and you have a nice bucket of money. Some money goes back out as cost of goods sold. And that's things like raw material costs, direct loaded labor costs for assemblers, shipping costs. If you are in a chargeback situation, it is entirely possible that your salary is also considered to be part of cost of goods sold. Typically in a chargeback environment, they're charging back because they're wrapping the development time back into the cost of goods sold to track that in an accurate way that makes them happy. So you take your revenue, you subtract out the cost of goods sold, and you have gross profit left over. That gross profit is the measure of the health of a company. In most industries, there's a range of typical gross profit percentages, and you want to fall somewhere in that range. If you're outside of that range, it either means if you're below that range, typically it means you're cheating somehow. It could mean you're managing really, really well, but typically it means you're cheating somehow. If you're outside that range on the high end, it generally means that you're paying too much and somebody hasn't thought this all the way through. So you take your gross profit, and some of that money you spend on what's known as general and administrative costs. It's also called G&A. It's also called fixed. By the way, cost of goods sold is also called variable costs. They're called that because it varies depending on how many widgets you're making in any given period. And I say period because it depends on how the company tracks that period. But general and administrative overhead or fixed costs don't change. Your rent doesn't change simply because you didn't sell any widgets this month or this period, whatever that period is. So facilities costs, non-direct loaded labor costs such as R&D, frequently that can't be charged back, although it can be expensed differently, but now we're starting to get into some advanced accounting stuff that I'm not going to get into. But you should know that that can happen. Insurance, your cost of sales, you can't treat those as cost of goods sold. They're their own thing, and they're truly overhead. Because typically your sales costs stay the same or go up when you're not selling as many things, and that's always been interesting to me. But once you've paid for all of those things, what's left over is called net profit. That's the money you get to reinvest in the company, or you get to hand back to your investors. In many companies, there's a little thing in between, just above net profit, called EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, depreciation, and taxes. That's a slightly more accurate measure of what you have left over at the end of the year from a tracking standpoint. For our purposes here, I've loaded interest, depreciation, and taxes into fixed costs, just to simplify this diagram. But if any of you are in an EBITDA situation, you're like, wait, she didn't say EBITDA. Now I have, and you can relax. So this is basically how money comes into and goes out of a company. And how you frame your business case depends in no small part on whether you are, I just realized I'm pointing at my screen like you can see my finger. Depends on whether you are coming out, whether your costs, your personal costs are coming out of cost of goods sold, or whether your personal costs are coming out of, or the cost of your proposal is coming out of general and administrative. And so that's something you need to think about as you approach how you frame that dialogue. Typically, it can be easier to get a cost of goods sold based proposal accepted, but some of that depends on the research nature and the research comfort level of your company. So moving on. So within that, what is a business case? Well, a business case with reasonable figures is how you demonstrate the worth of a proposal, not the worth to you, the worth to the company, because companies, and particularly company decision makers, very much live in the what's in it for me mindset, very much in the what's in it for me. And so you want to think about what's in it for them. Think back to the business case example I talked through a minute ago. What's in it for the company is your products aren't shipping on time, and your utilities, in this case the utilities, the add-on utilities were shipping without documentation at all, and we had a huge burden in tech support on those utilities because they were entirely undocumented, and this was in a DOS world. So let's contemplate that for a minute. And a lot of why that was true was because the person they had doing their writing, because by this time they'd fired their senior writer and kept me on, with my total of 6 months experience in the business, and wasn't that a rodeo. That tech support burden, which I also included, forgot to mention that, I also included that in the business case. For that documentation, getting that documentation shipped, I was able to reduce that tech support burden enormously and improve my productivity enormously as well, which meant it was much easier to ship things on time, or at least if they were late, it wasn't because of me. And that was of no small personal satisfaction to me. But it also was a benefit to the business. So it's a persuasive essay. It asserts a single proposal. You don't necessarily want to make, well, this proposal is going to include a new computer for Bonnie and an upgraded network for the entire company and a better printer and all of that. No, I focus on better computer for Bonnie. Had I wanted to focus a business case on all of those things, it would have been, we need a better infrastructure that has these elements. You see what I mean? You need to roll that framing up so you're asserting a single proposal. It proves your point with good argument, facts, and figures. Notice the first time I went in, I just said, well, because it's shiny and new and I want one. Well, that's not a particularly good argument. There's no fact there. Well, I want one was a fact, but it wasn't a particularly useful fact. And there were no figures attached to it at all. So it was really my word against him. Oh, well, I'll be a better writer, faster writer if you do this. Well, that's nice, but I have no way to measure faster. I have no way to tell whether you're lying to me when I go back in and after the fact. Look at this. So you give them those figures to give them that metric so they understand exactly. And it can be tracked and it can be looked at. And then, of course, that means you have to deliver on the promise, but nonetheless. And you don't simply include hearsay and wishful thinking. Well, I've heard the 286 is faster. No, one of the things that I did was I went down and I borrowed one of my programmer friends was out for a couple of days on personal leave, and I asked them if I could use their computer. This was all network-based. It was very easy to log in as my network and get my applications down. And I discovered, I actually did a comparison showing how much time, literally how much time it was saved. It wasn't wishful thinking. I didn't say, well, I understand I'll be faster or I hope I'll be faster. No, I was able to prove I would be faster on a 286 and compare those two numbers. And you'll see some examples in a minute where I talk about exactly that. So that's what a business case is. Business case has, in general, the following elements. It has an executive summary. Typically, depending on the size of the business case, that executive summary should be no more than a page. If it's a simple, straightforward business case, it should be about a paragraph. And that lets somebody who needs to make a decision quickly read through it, go, yes, either yes, I want to look at this in more depth, or yes, I'm kicking this over to finance and telling them to find a way to make it happen. And that executive summary, how I like to write those last, and how I like to write those is I like to write my current situation, proposal, financial proof, and then take the two most compelling sentences from the current situation, the two most compelling sentences from the proposal, and a summary of the financial proof showing the final outcome, and that's my executive summary. I like to keep that nice and tight. So current situation, Bonnie's computer is running very slowly. She's using outdated technology, and that's causing products to be shipped late and utilities to not be documented at all, which results in an increased tech support burden and lost revenue while we're waiting for docs to catch up with the product. We proposed, on the proposal, a couple of sentences, we proposed buying Bonnie a new computer, a new faster computer, and installing Windows on it so that she may work more effectively. Financial proof. This is how long it's taking Bonnie to do documents now. This is how long we anticipate it will take Bonnie to do documents in the future, thus resulting in the computer paying for itself and us beginning to recoup the cost that we spent on that by no later than X amount of time after the computer is in hand. Good, that's our executive summary, move on. And it was that fast. And I got to tell you, they never read more than the executive summary before I had that computer. That always blows me away. Sometimes you can nail it in the executive summary. So the current situation is a slightly longer version that talks through the problem. What is the problem you are trying to solve? It doesn't provide the solution yet. It focuses on what is the problem, what are the implications for the business of the problem. Not, this is really irritating me and I'm having to work 16 hours a day, and no. What's the problem for the business? Next section is proposal. That's where you lay out what you'd like to do. And it should be, start with a paragraph of here's exactly what I like to do, and then the rest of the paragraph should be about here's how it solves the specific problems and the specific varieties of the problem that I explained in current situation. Then you do have financial proof, more on that in a minute. Write up your little conclusion, which is basically a mirror of the executive summary. And then if there's any extensive supporting material, because your financial proof is a summary of what you learned, if there's any extensive supporting material, you would put that in an appendix at the end. Because every now and then you're going to hand it to a data weenie, and they are going to want to crawl through the details and check your math because they're like that. So if you cast your mind back to math class and your teacher would tell you show your work, supporting material is show your work. And that's generally what you find in a business case. Some terms to think about when you're talking about your business case. There's two ways to measure the success of a project. There's return on investment and cost avoidance. Return on investment is a catch-all. Yes, you also get return on investment in cost avoidance, but it's a framing issue. So for our purposes, return on investment, you're spending money to make money. It's about, you're asking for new dollars, and you're going to show how new dollars will come in. This will increase revenue. Think back to that flow of money. A return on investment typically increases revenue. That's the distinction I'm drawing here. And when you're doing return on investment, you must show how long before that new income will recoup the dollars spent and start to produce that new revenue. That's the period of return on investment. And you want to time this carefully and learn a little bit about your company, because different companies have different comfort levels for what that time frame can be. I've worked for companies where if it didn't show a return, if your proposal didn't show a return within 3 months, they were uninterested. I've worked for other companies where 10 years was fine. They had that kind of a lead time on showing what their returns were, and they were perfectly comfortable with it. Sony plans, how they do this, I have no idea, but Sony plans 150 years out in the future. I couldn't even begin to imagine doing that, but they do. Don't know how accurate they are, but they do. So that's a return on investment, and it depends on time frame and the actual amount of new revenue that will be generated. In a cost avoidance argument, you're trying to make the most of what you're already spending. You're redirecting dollars that are already being spent to spend them smarter. It's cost avoidance business cases are reducing either cost of goods sold or general and administrative. So you're not promising any new revenue, but what you are saying is I can reduce costs in one of these two areas if I can do proposal X. In thinking back to my example business case, I never promised that more income was going to come in. I said we'd get some income that we would have gotten anyway faster. I said that we would be reducing a cost in tech support, but I never said more people will buy our products because of this, because I just didn't know. I had no way to prove that, so I made a cost avoidance argument. And in that cost avoidance argument, you need to show whether the dollars will actually be redirected, in other words, not spent on their original allocation. And I was able to do that in tech support by pointing out that that meant that we could potentially not hire an extra person this year, as we had started to budget for. That budget was getting turned down, even though we desperately needed that person. And the QA manager was 100% behind me on that because she didn't want any more people. She was happy with the team that she had. She didn't want to go through the training. She didn't want to deal with any of that at that point in time for a problem that could be better solved a different way. So we were all on board with that. Interestingly, they never got to that point. They just read the summary, which 25 years later still cracks me up. But anyway, that's a framework for thinking about how you're going to set your financial proof up. Is it a return on investment where you're promising new revenue, or is it a cost avoidance where you're reducing cost of goods sold or reducing general and administrative costs? So in the financial proof, that's where you demonstrate that. You compare the current cost to the proposed costs, and you detail the savings or the time to ROI, to return on investment. Use actual company or industry standard numbers where you can get them, and trust me, you'll be able to walk into finance. Finance is always happy to talk to people who can say ROI or cost avoidance to them. I've never met a CFO, a controller, an accountant who didn't just get all excited and you're their new best friend when you use those terms and understand that you get the flow of money and talk about cost of goods sold and where you fit in that and say things like chargeback and EBITDA. They just get all very, very happy. And even if you use it wrong, they're still happy that you said it, and they will cheerfully explain to you where you went wrong and what to do to address that. In your financial proof, you can summarize those financials if you provide full versions in the supporting materials section. And I strongly recommend doing it that way because reading numbers is fun only to numbers people. And it doesn't support your case if they have to, if you're making your reader infer what you're asking for and infer what the benefit of that is going to be. Get it in front of their face in a nice summary, in a table, in a chart, in something, and put the fuller detail in an appendix so the detail weenies can go through it at their leisure. So let's look at some examples. Sharon, did I miss a poll? Do we have a second poll we wanted to do?
We have a second poll, but it's up to you if we do it. I suggest not.
Let's not at this point. Looking at time, let's move forward. That's okay, guys. Don't worry. It wasn't that exciting a poll. So let's walk through a couple of examples here. And I want to say right up front that these examples are technical documentation heavy because that's my background. I've taught doing a business case as the final project for my critical thinking class through UCSD. And so I've helped with and done and worked on a number of different business cases in a variety of different industries for a variety of different things. But the examples I can legitimately quote without having to go get permission are all documentation examples. In other words, these are examples I put together. And so those are the examples we're going to see. Feel free during the question period to ask for different or specific examples so that we can target that more effectively for you. So in this case, this particular one was for manuals versus tech support. I was working with a consumer electronics vendor, and this one didn't work, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The product manager had reached out to me and said, we need tech support. We need to do a better manual. Why? Well, because they told us we need to do a better manual. That's always a danger flag for me now. It's like, well, okay, I want more businessy why than somebody said we had to, but okay. So I went and looked at what their tech support burden per area. And area in their case was a single product line. This was this was for their TV line. We were talking about some other lines as well, but this was for their television line. And they made, I think, 20 different television models, and they called each television model an area. And so I got a spreadsheet with their numbers. I ran the left-hand side of this table running their numbers, showing what their burden was. You can see from the costs it was a few years ago. But nonetheless, it adds up to a pretty significant burden per year for each TV. And that was a largely averaged number. Some TVs obviously were less than that. Some of the high-end TVs were significantly more than that. We were going to start with a high-end TV, but I wanted to show them an average across the board. Then I went and I did a direct comparison to good documentation. Now, why did I do this? Well, because calls per area and lookups per area. Lookups are sometime that somebody had to go to the documentation. I wanted to show, and this was a live what-if demo I did, that somebody could, if they called 200 times a month, instead of calling 200 times a month, they went to the manual. Across the user base, 200 times a month, they went to the manual. Let's say they spent 15 minutes per page reading. Well, if they spend 5 or 15 minutes on a call, there's a cost per minute to that. If they spend 5 or 15 minutes reading the manual, there's absolutely zero cost to the company. They could spend an hour reading the manual, and it changes not at all the cost to the company. There's an approximate cost per page, approximate pages per area, and that's very much an average number. Some of those would have been way down. Some of those would have been way up. But you get to the number of, wow, it would cost per TV line, más o menos, about 17 grand. How much do I need to reduce that tech support burden before we're at least break even? And that number turned out to be 7%. If I could reduce their tech support calls 7%, we paid for the better documentation. And I knew from other projects I've been doing that we were running an average of 11 to 15% reduction in technical support costs. Some cases even higher than that, but a lot of people will still call. This was in an age before the internet was a huge place to go look up information. I could probably top that by quite a lot now. This was when still people really a lot relied on the phone. And so this is all very attractive. Where this went off the rails, unfortunately, was I presented this to the product manager and in essence said, I want you to spend 17 grand per TV that you're responsible for, so Sally over in tech support can reduce her costs. And you see how that wasn't so very compelling to the product manager. Had I made this case to the VP that both of those reported to, I think this would have been a more successful case. So sometimes who you present it to, no matter how solid the case is, sometimes who you present it to is as important as what you're presenting. Let's look at another example. Here's one that I did for a group that was considering buying FrameMaker, buying and using FrameMaker, but they were very concerned about the cost for training. Oh, I've heard it's a high learning curve, scary, 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 freak out, freak out. And Word is free, you know, we don't have to buy any, you know, that comes right on the computer, it's free. It's like, well, it's not actually free, but I understand from your perspective it's free. From your budget, yes, it is free. Except it isn't, because you're losing X amount of work per person per week, because you're having to do rework, because Word is not a page layout tool and you're trying to do long documents in Word. And it doesn't go well. And granted, this was a couple of versions back for Word, but it still doesn't go particularly well for really long documents, and Word will spit up all over the place and you'll lose your work. And so we worked out what those costs were. We looked at what their costs were to use Word. In other words, there's a cost to change and there's a cost to not change. And typically in a cost avoidance argument, you are exposing that cost to not change in a way they've not thought about it before. So we exposed the cost to not change. We exposed the cost to change, and then we figured out how long it was going to be before regained productivity recoups the cost of the proposed expense. And in this case, it was 9 weeks. That's under a business quarter. That was a very palatable number to the business. And last I heard, the company that I did this consulting with is still happily furthering the return on investment on that. The return on investment on that for them is now something like 350%. This was a year or two ago. Now something like 350%, because it just keeps accumulating after you recoup the money. So they're very happy with that. This was a very successful one. And I'm showing this because I know many of you are thinking about new tools and how do I show that. And the key on the new tools is there's a cost to keep doing what you're doing, and there's a cost to change. The cost to change must be ultimately less than the cost to keep doing what you're doing. That's the core of a new tools argument, is that it ultimately, in the long run, it's cheaper to change than it is to keep doing what we're doing. Final example, better internal guides. This one is also similar. There's a cost to doing it the way you've always been. There's a cost to doing it the new way. But this one has a slightly different flavor to it, which is there were mistakes being made. Word-of-mouth training is notoriously unreliable. People were making mistakes, and the people that we put this proposal together for were, in fact, in a financial arena where mistakes cost them money. They cost them money in end-of-year filing, deadlines missed, and the fines that go along with that. And they would get fined by the IRS and various other regulatory agencies for having incorrect information or having submitted the wrong form or having submitted the wrong piece of information on the right form. Everybody who's filed taxes knows exactly how this feels. Multiply that by a multi-million-dollar international company, and you get some idea of how tense these people were about this. We looked at just one small area, and these people also adopted this. Last I heard, the person who they brought in to do that consulting has been brought on to do that documentation, has been brought on full-time and is now crawling through the rest of the company, fixing this problem everywhere. So we expose the problem. We show the solution for the problem. That's what a business case does. Rips the Band-Aid off the problem and then actually put some nice Bactine and Neosporin over the problem so that it can really heal, as opposed to we just keep throwing a Band-Aid over it. That's the point of a business case. You need to, as you do in any other time, you need to think about your audience terminology. You guys can read, so I'm not going to walk through this with you, but the two people who are most going to be looking ultimately at your business cases are the C-level, CEO, Chief Operating Officer, COO, CFO, and then the rest of the finance department. Those are the ones who are really going to be scrutinizing business cases. Yes, you may need to walk it up the food chain some from there, but these are the people you really need to be talking to. And these are the needs and some keywords to use when you're talking to them about it in the business case, so they know you're talking their language. For the tech doc people out there, for the Marcom people out there in our audience, you know you have to talk to the audience. You know you have to talk to the audience. But we forget to do that internally. And this is a reminder to do your audience analysis just as you would for any external documents. Finally, I want to bring up a couple of pieces of recommended reading. First on the list, What Your CEO Wants You to Know by Ram Charan. It's a very small book. It's a very inexpensive book. And it's one of the tightest explanations of how money and finance and business decisions get made that I have ever read. It's wonderful. It's an easy read. You'll like it. Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado by Jeffrey Moore are exceptional discussions of technology adoption and what the implications are for, particularly for marketing, but you can extrapolate them out as well to what the implications are for technical documentation and what you can do within those different blocks. A book called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt. For those of you working in manufacturing, it's a almost a nonfiction novel that explains a lot of the underlying core concepts of what people who work in manufacturing are concerned about. And it's a little different than people who work in software or other industries are concerned about when they're looking at the bottom line, the profit and loss statement. By the way, that flow of money diagram I showed you, that's a profit and loss statement. It's a very brief, high-level one, but it's a profit and loss statement. You'll hear it called profit and loss. You'll also hear it called P&L for profit and loss. And the more you can think about how your stuff affects the P&L, the easier it's going to be to get those proposals accepted. Business at the Speed of Stupid by Dan Burke, while a few years old now, is still, wow, I read the case studies that they have in there, and I'm still seeing people making those decisions at that level of dumb. That's the case study part at the front is particularly nice to read because you can watch decisions going horribly, horribly bad in absolutely predictable ways that nobody in the room seems to see coming. And some of them you'll read and you think, my God, he was in our meeting and I didn't know that. I was in that meeting last week. How did he know? Any further questions? My email is on the board. Right now my email is down, so you may get a bounce notice. If you do, have no fear. I'm working on getting it back up again, and you can always email Sharon. Sharon, I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can start taking questions.
Okay. Well, we don't have any questions up yet, and I think that's because people were waiting for you to finish up. And I'm going to throw a question at you. How would you go about making the business case for adding another staff member?
Adding another staff member is similar to changing tools or improving your tools, in that what you do is you expose the cost of not having that staff member, and then you show how long it's going to take before that staff member recoups, as it were, the cost. Pause it on this. Hopefully my screen won't go into screensaver, but that's a pacing around question, so I'm going to pace a little bit. If your company pays overtime, unless I'll giggle at that thought, but if your company pays overtime, asking for a new person becomes very easy because you add up the overtime of everyone in your department, you compare that to the cost of bringing a new person on. It is almost always less to bring the new person on, even considering that you have to load in training costs. That's about an additional 35% by and large, industry standard number. So it's their salary plus their benefits plus an additional 35% to allow for training and ramp-up time. And that number compared to the number for what they're currently paying in overtime is it's usually a really easy case. Now, if the company doesn't pay overtime, this gets trickier because it's an invisible cost to them. And you still need to find a way to rip the Band-Aid off, because people who are working an enormous amount of overtime start to display symptoms. You can only do that for so long before you start running into problems. One of those problems is they start getting sick more frequently. So you start tracking sick time. You start tracking those kinds of things. You start tracking having to do rework because somebody messed something up because they were tired. They were just tired, or they were just trying to do it fast and they missed it. And that's rework. So you ask people to start tracking the number of times they have to rework something because they were just too exhausted. And I know, yes, that's extra work, but you're selling them on, I need this to get you help. Trust me, they'll put the extra work in. As a manager, I have never had somebody not put that extra work in to get me those numbers if they thought there was even a possibility of some additional help coming in at the end of it. Sometimes the best you get out of that argument is we can hire a contractor to help pick up the overflow because they don't want to commit to somebody long term.
Which leads us to our next question, which is, how do you make the business case to a potential client as a freelancer?
That is, that goes back, depending on what your area is, and I'm going to say, let's say it's tech doc because that's the example I can speak to most competently. In the initial conversation with them, obviously if they've put the job out there and they know they're looking for someone, now your business case is about why you rather than why somebody else. And that's your resume, and I'm going to presume you all know how to make that argument, or you wouldn't have been, you wouldn't still be being a freelancer. So that argument is marketing and how you position yourself and how you talk to them and how you interview, and that is way beyond the scope of this because that's not so much a business case anymore. But how to convince a client that isn't already thinking about doing this project, but you know they need to. That's a trickier case because you've got to rip a Band-Aid off pain they don't even know they have. They've either had it for so long or they simply don't realize that is painful, and it doesn't have to be painful. That you've got to rip that Band-Aid off, and again, it goes back to showing them the cost of not changing. Figure out what business problem they're having. Are they losing reputation because their docs are bad? And again, this is a strictly docs example, and I'm sorry about that, but these are the ones I can speak to most coherently. Are they losing reputation in the marketplace? Are you seeing a lot of buzz? And thank God for the internet, because this business case used to be a lot harder to make. Are you seeing buzz on industry sites suggesting that this isn't a very good product because it's hard to use and the manual is bad, and people are starting to complain that directly about it? Are you seeing reviews of the product, because reviewers will, by God, mention this if the manual is bad? Are you seeing reviews saying that the manual is bad? Assemble those and say, look, I've been doing a kind of a survey. I like to work in your area. I think you make great products, but I notice that you're taking these market hits. I can help you fix that. If you're doing it absolutely cold, ask the question: Are you taking a reputation hit in the marketplace? Signs of that are bleh. And what they're costing and what they could potentially cost you. Are your returns too high? Consumer electronics, that was a huge thing. I got in a lot of consumer electronics companies by talking about high returns and high product support costs, and by by having numbers that showed that for every $1 you spent on docs, you could drop your product returns by $15 and drop your tech support costs by 10 on average.
And by consumer stuff, keep in mind she's not just talking, although she said consumer electronics, anything that's going out to consumers. The return rate is I have found, a fantastic place to go, because usually product managers or factory floor guys or those kinds of people are held accountable for the number of returns. A certain percentage is considered normal. somewhere around 2 to 5%, depending on the product. That's considered normal. If you just slip through our QA process, you're right, it doesn't work. So anything over that is because the product was not suitable, or it didn't work as expected, or, and this is typical, people couldn't understand the instructions. So they think it's not suitable for the purpose, or it didn't work as expected because they couldn't read the instructions.
Yeah, and so they'll return it as, quote, broken, when in fact it's operating perfectly.
Okay, we've
yes.
got 6 minutes left. And there's a question that's a really good one that I wanted to ask you, which is, how do you make a business case for an assistant manager? Which is related to another question. That we're a department of 15, writers, designers, translators, as staff, and as a staff member, I think we need an assistant manager. Our manager has 2 other departments that report to him besides docs, which is related to another question that's up, which is, how do you create a business case for a completely new position within a company? It's the same thing from different angles.
Yes, and again, it comes back to showing the cost of not having that. I mean, I hate to keep beating you with that stick, but it comes back to showing the cost of not having that. And you have to get really creative for something like that. I'm actually working on a similar business case to that right now for the company I'm in. I feel that we need to have somebody dedicated to tracking, managing, and improving our overall customer experience. I also happen to think that should be me, so I'm putting that business case together to make that all work. And so what I've been tracking down is I've been tracking down what is the pain, what are the costs of not having that. One of the costs in this case, going back to the one where it's an assistant manager, because I really can't get into the details of my personal business case right now because that's still all very company internal and what have you. But some of the things that I'm looking at, some of the things that I think you should be looking at to expose that pain. How much time is the manager, who has different groups reporting to them, spending handling problems in docs that they shouldn't have to handle? How many problems in docs, again, that have a productivity effect, not just unless you feel comfortable putting a dollar amount to the morale effect, and some people do, and I encourage you to think about that because it's possible to put a dollar amount on that morale. But how many problems are going unsolved or are getting solved very, very late because this person doesn't have the time to take a look at and fix those problems, and what is the cost of those problems? That's where you start to make that case for, if you guys want these problems to go away, this is what we need to do to solve that. Does that make sense? Did that help?
I think it did. I think it did. And very often, I've found if you're trying to create the business case for a completely new position, you can show what's not getting done by the people who are stepping in trying to do that. There's a cost to that.
Yes.
And sometimes you need to look to see what your competitors are doing. So, for example,
thank you. Yes, that I should have mentioned that. You're correct.
I'm hearing a lot of TechCom people saying, we need to be doing video. We need to be doing 5-minute videos about our products that are posted on our website or on Facebook or on YouTube or wherever it is we wish to post them, but we need to have them. And we are drowning in just content development, just the basic content development. And when I say, okay, well, what's that costing you? They go, I don't know. And okay, are your competitors doing? Are your competitors doing this? Oh, yeah, they are. Okay, so it's going to be tough to put a dollar value on this, but your brand is not as on top of it as your competitors' brands. So there may not be a dollar amount you can put on that, but you can certainly tell your management, our competitors are doing that, and look how many hits they're getting. Because you can see that on YouTube. You can see how many hits somebody's getting, a video is getting. And you can go, look at the number of hits they're getting. And we're not even playing in that game. So, yeah. All right, last question up. Would you recommend taking finance classes to help building a business case?
I would consider it, yes, because I know my business, as good as my very first business case was, and I will confess I had my aunt, who was the quality assurance manager for General Dynamics, help me out extensively with that. I didn't do it all by myself. I found that once I started running my own business and having to focus on P&Ls and having to, all of this stuff I learned, Sharon and I refer to it as, from running our own businesses, we have combat MBAs. We don't actually have a piece of paper, but for all intents and purposes, we had a combat brevet to MBA. Most of the stuff I learned by doing it wrong and going, ow, okay. The more you understand how finance works, the more you understand how stuff goes through understand how to read a P&L, how to read a balance sheet, the easier it is to put the finance section together. It doesn't necessarily help with the proposal or current situation, but it certainly helps with putting the finance piece together, because that's the part where it's absolutely got to be in language that makes sense to the finance people. You can't go in and give them an incoherent spreadsheet that they can't see where you got any of those numbers and expect them to believe what you say is true. So, and you certainly can't do it if you can't explain to them exactly in what categories and in what areas they're going to see these savings or see this increase in revenue. And so I didn't take a basic accounting class, and that's one of those things, looking back over the years of running my business, I wish I had gone to at least a community college and taken like Accounting 101, just a basic, or understanding financial concepts, or finance for non-financial managers. There's a number of good books out titled something like that. I'm sure, especially with the proliferation of online programs and webinars, there have got to be some really nice short programs on how to understand finance if you're not in finance out there. And yeah, I think it would be fabulous to go take that. Don't learn it the way I did, by screwing it up and then going, oh, now I know that. Thank you.
Yes. All right. It is just slightly past the top of the hour, and I know you all have a busy day, so I want to thank you so much for coming. I hope that you learned something that was of value. Don't forget that we have, in fact, recorded this webinar, and tomorrow, those of you who are attending live, you will get an email with the location of the recording, as well as a link to some ancillary files that should help you. So go do something amazing, and thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.